Hello and welcome. You're watching News of the Hour on youtube.com/NDTV. Remember, this is where we go beyond the headlines and get you much more on the big news stories of the day. Well, it is the last day of 2019. It is, in fact, the last day of the decade. And if there's anything that's really stood out this year, it has been the protests following the Citizenship Amendment Act being passed as a law. The last month of 2019 has been perhaps entirely about these protests that have fanned across the entire country. And when we asked viewers in our poll, the day and night protests that have been happening in various places, clearly what most people wanted to hear about. And that's why we're going to focus this discussion on those protests on the last day of 2019. So what do we know about the protests today? Well, there are government employees in Assam who are doing a black badge protest as their disapproval of the Citizenship Amendment Act. There are protests in several of the southern states, in Chennai, in Palakkad, in Bengaluru. There are going to be protests through the day today. Also, we are hearing that the DMK's very unique form of protests of making rangolis or kolams, as they are called, in protest against both the National Register of Citizens and, for that matter, the National Population Register also is something that is now gaining ground. So there are women who are coming forward to spearhead that protest, and they're using their art and they are expressing their protests with these colorful rangolis or kolams, as they're called. 8 of them, in fact, were briefly detained on Sunday as well, and it prompted the DMK chief to come out and say that people's right to dissent was being crushed, and since then the DMK's kolam protests have only grown. But perhaps the epicenter of those protests and the most iconic images of the movement against the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens is right here in a Delhi colony, Delhi's Shaheen Bagh, in fact, where women have now spent 16 days out on the streets. This is at a time when the capital has been at its coldest. In fact, minimum temperatures have been touching 2. And here you see one of those photographs, and there are so many of them on social media at the moment. The faces of courage, the faces of determination. These are the women of Shaheen Bagh who night after night have been spending time out in the cold underneath this temporary tarpaulin that's been put up for these protests. And they're in fact doing this as a sort of relay. So through the night, there will be some women who are protesting, and then in the morning they go home to do their domestic and household chores, and another lot come in and take their place, and similarly then they go off and they're replaced by a third lot. But it's meant that on National Highway 24, in fact the Noida Kalindi Kunj Highway as it is called, it's a road that connects Delhi to its principal satellite city, and it's meant that there have been huge traffic disruptions as well. But these women haven't budged now in 16 days. This despite notices from the area SHO, notices from Saturday onwards, which have said the protest site must be vacated immediately. It's been another 2 days since then, and the protesters are showing no signs of moving. So their numbers are only growing. The core of these protests, of course, these housewives who are saying that they have a role to play in standing up for their rights and demanding that the Citizenship Amendment Act be repealed, and in fact no further action be taken on the National Register of Citizens. So they're doing this while carrying out their household chores, etc. As we said, that protest happening in shifts. And it's really been quite remarkable. Here, in fact, you see that police barricade in a way that has been put up. And even on top of that police barricade, you have those anti-CAA and anti-NRC posters that have been put up, and indeed those banners which say "Stop Police Brutality." Now, this is a fairly small neighborhood, in fact, of and low-income neighborhood of Delhi that has now suddenly shot to the headlines. This is in between the Jamia Millia Islamia university, which saw those student protests initially, which really began all of this in a sense, and saw that very brutal police crackdown also, which has then found echoes in other parts of the country, with students standing in solidarity with their counterparts in Jamia Millia. So this is in between Jamia Millia Islamia and the Yamuna banks, in fact. So a tiny colony sandwiched between these two places, which is now really the focal point of these protests. Let's take you through some of those iconic images that we are seeing, in fact, from Shaheen Bagh, or a night at Shaheen Bagh. And there you see people holding up their mobile phones as these sort of lamps or beacons of protest. And today, in fact, along with the normal protests, there's a group that has decided to spend New Year's Eve with the protesters of Shaheen Bagh, and they're saying that we will celebrate democracy in Shaheen Bagh, and we will do it with poetry, with dance, with song. So all of that expected, in fact, in Shaheen Bagh this evening. Now, what is that going to mean in terms of the protests at a time when the police has already said that it wants to clear the roads out and it no longer wants to see these almost semi-permanent structures in the middle of the road? In fact, this has had a spillover effect on other roads like the Delhi-Noida direct flyway, which in fact connects Delhi and Noida, which is now seeing far more traffic because this particular link road has been cut off. We're also seeing more traffic on Mathura Road. So in a sense, the entry of essential supplies into Delhi has also been affected by these protests. But these women, and indeed the other protesters who are congregating there, are saying that this is something that is far too important for them to now back down. So we're going to be continuing to track those protests in Shaheen Bagh. But apart from the songs and the dance that we will see over there, there are so many artistic forms in which this protest is now spreading. And perhaps one thing that is truly trending today is an initiative by classical singer T.M. Krishna and actor Nasiruddin Shah. So what is it that we're talking about? Well, they call it We the People of India. And I am in fact going to let their video do the talking. So let's just play this out for you. We the People of India, a powerful statement.
Vayam Bharatasya Jana. हम भारत के लोग, हम हिंद की आवाम. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual.
So there you have the golden voice of Nasiruddin Shah reading from the preamble to the Indian Constitution, and also then T.M. Krishna does an exquisite rendition of the national anthem. So really stressing India's plurality, its wonderful inclusive nature, the fact that it has embraced all communities, all religions, all creeds and sects in it, and the need, stressing the need at this point to make sure that that doesn't go away. Well, as we said, we'll be tracking the protests that are taking place here, and it may be the last day of 2019, but these protests aren't going anywhere, and we're going to be tracking them and on top of them in 2020 as well. So thanks for watching. This is our last broadcast of News of the Hour for 2019, or one of the last at least. We'll see you again in 2020.